welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
I'm Brian.
I'm Lindsay.
And we're here to talk about Back to School, starring Rodney Dangerfield, Sally Kellerman, Keith Gordon, Terry Farrell, Paxton Whitehead, William Zabka, Ned Beatty, M. Emmett Walsh, Burt Young, Robert Downey Jr., and Sam Kinison. Directed by Alan Metter, released in 1986 on an $11 million budget, grossed over $91 million at the box office.
Crazy, $91 million. Jay, why are we reviewing this?
Well, it's the time of the year when we're supposed to be going back to school. Now, that's happening in various forms wherever you live. But we thought it'd be fun to do three films somewhat around school. And so we picked this one out. We're going to do a little lesser known one from 1986 called My Science Project, and then wrap it up with 10 Things I Hate About You, because you can't do school movies without some Shakespeare, remakes and stuff. But honestly, I've been wanting to do this one for a while because it's one of the movies I grew up watching. I didn't see this when it came in theaters. I was too young, but I remember my dad renting this because we thought Rodney Dangerfield was funny. He grew up watching Dangerfield when he was in his comedic rise in the 70s. So he was a big deal doing stand-up. And then we had seen the TV version of Caddyshack. I didn't see the real one until many years later. But, of course, he's huge in that. And that launched him into a movie career that he hadn't had. And then of all the movies he did, this one was by far one of the more successful ones. And there's something about this one that's always held up for me. I think it was my first vision of watching something and thinking, oh, that's what college is. And then I went to college and it's nothing like this at all, but it did give me a front load for it. And I think because it's got people in it that I've seen in so many other things, and I'm not going to lie, I'm a sucker for a good pop song. That Jude Cole song is awesome. I love it. So I've had the soundtrack for years. So yeah, we're doing it because it's a school movie and because somehow in all the years of Film Strip, we haven't done any Rodney Dangerfield. And so we got to get this one going. So I got to ask though, have either of you seen this before, Brian?
I did a long time ago, a one-time only probably thing. My parents also were big into Rodney Dangerfield. They have slides, if you remember what slides are, of Rodney Dangerfield in, I don't know what you want to call it, in performance, doing stand-up comedy. We also have a restaurant down the way from here called Dangerfield's. So that's kind of cool, a little tie there. But yeah, so I mean, I remember watching it a long time ago when I was a kid, but I have not watched it since, so.
I actually watched it pretty recently. The guy that I'm dating loves this movie, and so we watched it just maybe a month and a half ago, and when I told him we were reviewing it, he kindly offered to watch it with me again. It's one of his favorite movies, and it's really great. And actually watching it with someone who loves it so much really opened me up to like some tiny nuances that I totally would have missed otherwise. I liked Rodney Dangerfield before I knew Rodney Dangerfield was Rodney Dangerfield. There was a cartoon movie I had when I was a kid called Roger Dangerfield. And Rodney Dangerfield was the voice of that cartoon dog. And it was one of my favorite movies. And then as I got older, I was like, oh, it's that guy. I know him.
So it's nice to know somebody else had date night watching this, because unlike a lot of what we reviewed where my wife says absolutely not, she heard we were doing this. She's like, oh yeah, I like that one. I'll watch that. And then in the middle of it, she said, y'all need to do more good stuff like this. I don't know. I think what we picked is kind of fun, but no, you know what? Yeah, this one is one that has stuck with me forever. Like for all the reasons we've already mentioned. I'm kind of blown away by how much of it holds up too, because we've talked about it on other shows, but I've worked at colleges and universities for 20 plus years now. And there's a lot of stuff in this, y'all, that is still very much true. I'll try to point it out as we get to it, but I'm glad you both had seen it before and got a chance to revisit. And Lindsay, I'm glad it's something that you sort of recently discovered too. So a lot of fun to watch. I agree. It's definitely one that you watch with people for sure. So I think before we go any further though, Brian, I'm going to put it to you. Tell us what happens in Back to School.
Thornton Mellon, played by Rodney Dangerfield, built his tall and fat clothing empire through hard work, determination, and street smarts instead of school smarts. Now, he hopes his son Jason can do what he didn't and finish college. Thornton dumps his cheating wife, whom he married after Jason's mother passed away, and realized that she had distanced him from his son. So, he, along with limo driver and sideman Lou, set off to pay a surprise visit to Jason at college. Jason, though, hates college, pretty much all of it, and is ready to drop out until Thornton decides to enroll with him so they can do it together. Thornton learns quickly that his years of experience mean absolutely nothing in the academic world, as he often clashes with the university's faculty, except for his literature professor Diane, played by Sally Kellerman. Jason continues to struggle and gets frustrated watching his dad be the life of the party and not take college seriously. However, Jason's fortunes begin to improve when he finally makes the school diving team, which angers his rival, who is already on the team, and catches the eye of a co-ed named Valerie he's infatuated with. Facing expulsion in spite of his financial donations to the university, Thornton must go before the board of his professors and pass a series of oral exams to remain in school. This happens the morning of a big diving meet where Jason performs well, while his rival attempts to throw the event by faking a cramp. But the diving coach has a trick up his sleeve and recruits Thornton to perform a fill-in dive, having seen Thornton perform a nearly impossible dive in his younger days. Thornton nails the dive, they win the meet, he finds out he passes his classes, and all seems to end well as he gives a speech at graduation and credits roll.
Very good. I think that's a good summary of what goes down. There's a lot in this movie. Oddly enough, for big comedies, particularly of 80s comedies, they tended to be pretty simple, but this one gives us a whole 15, 20 minutes of prologue before we ever get into what's going to be the meat of the story.
I really like the opening credits, the opening scenes. I meant to research and I didn't. I'll do that in between, but those pictures, those old school pictures of Rodney Dangerfield were so cool. And I don't know if you guys know if that was just him doing the, work life thing, auditioning on old sets. I know one of them was actually a Caddyshack picture. But there were a few of them that I didn't recognize. But I really liked that opening montage. And then, of course, later in the movie, there's that aha moment where he says the same thing to his son that his dad said to him. And I was like, oh. But I enjoyed the opening scene.
They're about half and half, really. Like, a lot of them are things that were just staged for the movie, and they kind of put his face on stuff. A lot of them, though, are from his life. And Rodney Dangerfield had a lot of things before he made it in comedy. He was a truck driver, so that time when you see him in and out of the truck, that's him by his truck at the time. And other things that some with the kids when they were little, those are his kids, and all that kind of stuff, which I think is kind of neat. We don't do that much in movies anymore. We don't do montages like that as a way to tell stories. And I did like the introduction. I don't know if y'all caught it. Jason Hervey, before he was Wonder Years and everything else, he became as the young Rodney Dangerfield. I thought he had him down. He did the little neck collar pull thing and the no respect stuff. That was cute with his dad. And what you realize is that his dad is a tailor and runs like a dry cleaners and things like that in the old neighborhood. And they're Italian, they're Maloney's, and he doesn't like school. He doesn't want to be in school. He wants to run the shop with his dad. And his dad's like, no, you got to get an education. And what we find out is that Thornton's like, not so much. And ends up taking over that business and turns it into this global empire, which is a story we've all heard, right? It's everybody's sort of fantasy in the 80s was to not go to school, but to be a multimillionaire. Because, you could just do that.
Back in the 80s, right? Everyone is a millionaire. I love that he named the shop the Fat and Tall. And I love the scenes where he's doing the commercials. Yeah. Does this suit make me look fat? Yeah. I need to hire fatter actors.
Yes.
I thought that was pretty good. I like that, though.
Rodney Dangerfield has such a presence on the screen. I mean, he really steals Caddyshack from everybody that's in that movie. That movie's infinitely quotable. But when Dangerfield's on the screen, that Al Chervik character just blows everybody away. He's such an obnoxious jerk. He's obviously unbelievably rich. He just throws money around. And what we'll find is Thornton does kind of the same thing. I've often kind of said, like, these guys are cousins. Like, they know each other. Somewhere along the line, they've crossed paths, played around together at Bushwood.
Well, I think it's funny because I think it's a dig on how rich people are, right? Like, they think that they can do whatever they want by throwing money at the problem. And so he exaggerates that a ton in this by just, oh, here's $200, do this for me. Or here's another couple thousand. Oh, I can't get into school. Let me build a building for you, hey. And the fun part is the school, the head of the school is just like, he gave us lots of money. He can do whatever he wants. It's good.
Right. I mean, I think and Jay, I know you work in higher ed, so I don't want to step on your toes or anything, but that's at least prevalent in TV shows. I didn't grow up with parents who were paying my way into college, so I don't know if that's a real thing. I assume it is because it's on so many. I just recently started watching The Politician on Netflix, and that's like a big part of the movie is his rich parents or Harvard trying to get his parents to basically donate money for a building. And it's just one of those things that it was blown out of proportion to be funny in this movie, but it's almost like a dagger because it's kind of true, but still funny in context.
I'll tell you two things. One is, I think this is supposed to be a knock on the nouveau riche, people that came into money in one generation. They haven't had generations. It's not a Rockefeller who wouldn't act like this. So that's why he's so outlandish with everything. It's also to show you too, and this is what I love, is even when he's making fun of those commercials and stuff, I love that boardroom scene where he's like, no, do this for a year. Like, he's obviously figured out how to work the market, how to work real estate. He's really smart, street smarts, right? So he's thinking off the seat of his pants and figuring stuff out. So that is what I think it's a rib on. And I'll tell you both right now, I've known a few people and met a few people that donated enough money to get their name on some buildings at some of the colleges I've worked at. None of them acted like this dude, but let me tell you that the administrators acted just like Dean Martin. They will roll out the red carpet and kiss the feet and the ring and whatever you want. Do you have grandchildren? Go have some and we'll let them in this school with scholarships. Yep. That's how it goes. I mean, look, fair or not, money moves things. And if you've got the kind of dough, by the way, to get your name on a building, y'all, that's a lot of money. Like, nowadays, that's at least like $40 million. Back then in 86, that was probably like $10 million he dropped on them easily and didn't even blink. That's how you need to realize like how rich this dude is. He's like, you won't let me in school? Okay, how about I build your new college of business? And next thing you know, like that afternoon, we were getting that done. I would have loved to have been the development officers that the dean called and said, you need to get in here right now. I just made your day. So it is funny how that works.
I love his line. And I mean, I don't know, maybe it's pessimistic. I don't know. But I love the line where he goes up to that snooty teacher who's like, you don't deserve to be here. And he goes, hey, the only reason you're teaching here is because people like me pay for your buildings.
Yep.
And I'm like,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, he's not wrong.
He's not. I love that guy, Philip Bombay. I mean, a classic theater performer there that we drag into these comedies. That's how these guys get work, which I always find is fun. But I absolutely love Paxton Whitehead because he's not a bad guy. He's not evil at all, because that would have been the temptation, is to make this guy so outlandish that you hate him. What you just realize is that he's the pure academic. Right? Maybe he worked for a little while, but he is a guy that has studied economics and studied business. He thinks he's got it down to this exact science. And then he meets a real businessman. And what I love is that when Thornton starts ripping off all that stuff in the class, like, you missed everything. You got to, pay.
You got to bribe this guy and bribe that guy.
Yeah. That's the best. People, that ain't the Boy Scouts. And every kid in the class is like taking notes.
So good.
I love that. But that's so much fun, right? Because I've been in classrooms with like returning students that may be a little bit older or whatever and have got a little bit, world wise to them, sometimes too much. And I especially like history classes that have military veterans in them, you want to talk about getting people's buttons? Like they will say like, no, that's not exactly how it is. Let me lay it out for you. And I love that too, because it's so much fun to watch Rodney Dangerfield try to acclimate to school and the different ways he does. And the business professor is one thing, that the other two that we really get to see, we'll talk about in a bit. But I just love Dangerfield's whole thing, because like every third line, his eyes are just bugging out of his head. It's just, and that's if you ever watched any of his stand up, that's kind of his thing. I mean, he's really riffing. And what I told my wife, what was funny about this is if you look at the credits, there's like 6 or 7 people credited with writing this. Which on a movie, you always know there's like a dozen people that write on them or whatever, but usually that's a sign of a problem. Like there's too many hands in the pot. But what I found out in a little bit of research was Dangerfield really kind of gave him the broad stroke of what he wanted to do. And he said, just leave me blanks with my dialogue, and he wrote it like every night before he did his stuff. And Sally Kellerman loves to joke that I didn't know who this guy was, except he was the Miller Lite commercial guy. She said, I didn't know who he was. She said, but then he comes out and said every night he's sitting there just writing pages of dialogue, and he would come in and he would say something and one of us would mess up the next line. He's like, no, your line is like, he knew everybody's stuff, which was just neat to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, his comedy, I love also Sam Kinison in this movie too.
Yes.
Right? And we'll get to that, but they bring both of their comedy styles so well into this movie. Dangerfield is known for the way his facial expressions, right? He uses his facial expressions to get his jokes across, and he does it so well. And Kinison is known for screaming at you, right? Yeah. And when he first gets introduced in this film, he's given a lecture and he's so calm and all this, and all of a sudden you're waiting the whole time, right? You're just feeling like he's going to yell at some point. And I watched this with my 12-year-old son, and I said, oh, Sam Kinison. I said, watch this guy. He's hilarious. He's going to yell. And my kid's like, what? I don't get it. And then all of a sudden he's like building it up. And all of a sudden, boom, hits it. And that kind of comedy is just not around anymore, where they have a stick and they stick to it every time, your Gallaghers and your Kinnisons and all that.
And you can thank Dangerfield for Kinison being in this movie. They tried out a lot of different people, and Dangerfield was known to find young comics and try to give them a shot at something. So like they tried out Jim Carrey, but he wasn't old enough for this. Oh yeah. And so but he said, Sam Kinison is this, trust me. He brought Sam in, he's like, comb your hair down, wear a tweed suit, and then just lose your mind to this chick in the front row. And it is hilarious, but it is every Sam Kinison bit you love to know.
Oh, and the best part is when he goes off on Vietnam and he's yelling at the girl, and then Dangerfield's like, hey, settle down. And he's like, what do you know? And he goes off and then he goes at him and he's like, I like this guy. And that was a great scene. Just a great scene.
Good answer. I'm watching you. Good answer.
Now, did either of you ever have professors like these two? Either the economics professor or the freaking weird out history professor?
No. Absolutely. Mine wasn't a history professor, though. He was actually an English professor. He taught lit and ecology and critical writing skills, but he was fully hippie, like went to Canada during Vietnam type of guy, like no smart person will ever run for president, and here's why. Super into like yin and yang and Jungian theory. Like you could get an A in that class if you wrote a 20-page paper on Jungian theory, regardless of the book you were reading. It did not matter. Wow. So he wasn't a yeller, but he would go off on these crazy tangents, and it was such a fun class. And I would request to have him, and my advisors were like, why? Everybody hates that guy. I was like, because I got it figured out. I know how to make an A in that class.
It's the game. You're exactly right. And that leads to our third professor, Diane, played by Sally Kellerman. I had a professor that was very much like this. my lit professor. She would come in flowing, garb and long dresses and all these scarves and whatnot. And
she was fully dressed like an English professor.
Yes,
that is exactly what you expect an English professor to dress like.
Yes, and would sit like cross-legged backwards on a chair and read this poetry to you in these sultry tones, and like none of us were really turned on by it as much as we were just enthralled by this woman. I was convinced she was a vampire and just had us all glamour for a long time. But Lindsay, like you, I figured out early on, like everything for this woman is a metaphor for the fall of communism. So if I can turn everything into that, I'm going to get an A. And we had some poem once about a dead Russian hooker rotting in the sun. I don't remember the name of it. Somebody tell me what it was. But I said, well, clearly that's the metaphor of the fall of the Leninism. And I just went on this whole bullshit for like 10 minutes. And she was like, yes, exactly. I had read that play 2 minutes before class, or read that poem 2 minutes before class. I said, I'm going to riff this, because I told two of my friends, I said, I bet you she'll buy it, because if you could sell it, she would buy it. And I learned the art there of like, if you just believe it enough and you fake it enough, people will go for it. But I loved Diane in this because she reminded me so much of the typical English professor that I knew.
Yeah, I had nothing like that in my college. My professors were really boring. The only one I had that was we had a class called film studies where we had to watch movies and do tests on them. So there were two different professors. One who let you watch real current films, Top Gun, whatever, right? And one that would watch just weird, bizarre BS movies like Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing and some Hitchcock thing that nobody had ever seen before, and the Rosebud movie,
Citizen Kane.
We watched that. So
the greatest movie of all time.
Holly and I got into that one. But we found out early that you didn't have to go to class, because all he did during class was read the exact word for word notes that are in the little pamphlet that he gave you. So, and every test was open notes. So there was no reason to go to a 4-hour class at night on a Monday to listen to him lecture. So we would literally skip the whole lecture part and then go for the second half of the class to take the test on the previous week's stuff and then leave. And then do the same thing the next week. There was just no point. So that was the weirdest professor that I had. But yeah, most of mine were pretty tame, but I was in computer classes, so not a lot of excitement in those.
I guess not. But
no.
But it is fun to watch this sort of typical college experience, and we've skipped over it, but we got to talk about the setup of it here, and it's a good way to talk about Jason, the son here, right? Obviously has grown up and lived a pretty darn good life. He's going to this big college. This was shot like partially at Wisconsin and partially at like Cal State and several places around. But if you see anything outside, everybody's in red and white. That's UW-Madison. So you notice that Nick, the podcast as Nick was like, oh yeah, that. I think he knows anything tied to Wisconsin. So we're doing this. He's like, oh yeah, it was shot at Wisconsin. Which apparently Rodney Dangerfield had like some real affinity for. But anyway, he goes to see, and poor old Jason is miserable at school because, and I mean, you can see why, right? Like he didn't make the diving team, so he's the towel boy. He didn't get into the fraternity. He hates his classes, and he has one friend who has no friends. The unbelievable Robert Downey Jr., coked out of his mind, no doubt, but giving an unreal performance with blue hair.
I said to my kid when he came, I said to my kid when he came out, I said, hey, it's Iron Man. And my kid's like, no, it's not. And he goes, holy crap, it is. I'm like, yeah, that's Iron Man right there. Well, and he got a kick out of that. But I love the character that he plays, Derek Lutz. Just doesn't give a shit about anything. And he will, even the jocks, he's just like, what are you going to do about it? You know, you want to beat me up? Big freaking deal. Do it. I don't care. You suck.
I knew people in college that had this guy's attitude, that were like really smart, but they didn't know what the hell they were talking about either. And they would like challenge people to debates that had no business talking to them, and they would always wind up on the wrong end of it. And we would just sit there and go like, man, that was a bad idea, but you couldn't not watch it.
No, yeah, I agree. I know people like that too. I had a guy in college that you ended up being in my wedding party. His roommate was your typical like computer nerd, right? And he would argue about anything computer wise. If you said something wrong, he would argue to his last breath until you admitted he was right about it, even if he wasn't. Oh my God! And you're just like, dude. It's no wonder you have no girlfriend or you have no life. I mean, God. So, yeah, that was fun.
Actually, he reminded me of a lot of my friends from high school. Like, I was just in that group in high school, and, we were all, like, kind of nerdy, kind of like punk kids, kind of, didn't like the jocks or whatever, and they would... and I say they because I was far, far too, like, horrified to ever, like, I just wanted to kind of, like, back up in a corner, unless it was on a stage. Like, I wasn't, I wasn't putting myself out there like that. But they would, like, all the popular kids would walk by, and they would basically haze them. Like, just yell, not yell, but, they had nicknames for everybody, and... as they walked by, would just yell the nicknames like Swamp Thing and the Grape, and
wow,
there were Fatty McStank, like the classics, and you're in school, so they're not going to do anything, because then you get in trouble, and they're on the football team or whatever, so they didn't want to not play, but it's more akin to, I think, the group I hung out with in high school and college. We were so in our own special little bubble, that we didn't really come into a ton of adversity head on like that. Not in my group anyway.
See, this is the thing when I said at the beginning that this movie I thought taught me what college was going to be like, and it was totally wrong. The movie that would have taught me what college is actually like, had it been out when I was a kid, is Pitch Perfect. That's much more like what college is. Everybody finds their little group, and that becomes your world, and then you just ignore everything else. And that was me in college. That was my friends that were in different groups. Everybody has their own little clique. This one is much more like the idea that college is just high school extended. And because everybody, like Chaz, the perpetual 80s douchebag William Zabka, it's
Johnny Karate.
Right, exactly. He, by the way, is awesome on the Cobra Kai show that they have now.
So good.
You should definitely check that out. But I mean, he talks about how he got typecast as the 80s jerk after the Karate Kid, and he said something once. I found a clip of him talking and said, there's 20 minutes of me not being a total a-hole that got cut out of this movie because the director was convinced, no, you just need to be the bad guy from Karate Kid again. And so that's all they would cut around the poor guy. But this movie's much more like that. It's like high school, but just at college where you can drink and party and nobody cares. And that's, of course, not what college is like. It's much more like what you talked about, Lindsay, and I've said it's much more smaller groups, and you just kind of stay in your group and your group rolls forward. But I do love Derek's whole, like, he's got a helmet with a missile through it because football is some sort of metaphor for war, and I love it. I love that whole little speech. The way he just rips those lines in and out, and I called him out, coked out of his head. True or not, he was flying back and forth from New York to where they shot this because he was on SNL at the time. So the dude was working like insane hours and getting it done. I mean, no wonder he's gone on to superstardom, and thank goodness he got himself clean, because what a force he is, and you can see it just in the little parts here. I got to talk a little bit though about one of the funniest scenes in the movie, and I got a real flashback too. I don't know if this was y'all's experience, but when they go to do registration and you have to stand in lines with the punch cards, y'all, that was when I was in college. Like, before we did it on computers, you stood in lines with punch cards. And Thornton's great idea is, let's have Lou stand out by the limo with Bruce Springsteen on a sign, and all the kids flood out.
I love the thought process too, where he was like, hang on, let me think. We're in college. What would college kids? Got it. And it's right. He was huge. He's still huge, but he was really huge, I
mean, so today that would be if somebody stood out in the parking lot with Drake on a sign, and everybody would run.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was in college, we had to do a similar. We didn't have punch cards, but we had to literally go with the classes we wanted in our hands, and we'd wait our turn in line, and you'd go up and you'd say, "Okay, I want this class at this time," and they'd say, "Nope, that's closed." Shit. How about this class? This class at this time. Yep, we have 3 slots. Okay, I'll take one. How about this class? Oh, that collides with that class. Shit. And it was like, it was a pain in the ass. That only happened for like a couple weeks because I was right at the start of that computer age, and we went online after that, and thank God, because it was so much easier to pick your classes when you could see the seats open and whatnot. But yeah, that first couple quarters that was not fun.
I think my freshman class was one of the first freshman classes that started being able to register for classes online. But you had to do it at the Math Emporium, which is essentially a warehouse, at least then, was just a warehouse full of computers and desks, and you just went in.
Painful.
I'll tell you, though, the other thing we're introduced here is and she got introduced in an earlier scene, but there's a girl that Jason is absolutely obsessed with, Valerie Desmond, played by Terry Farrell, who, I don't know, Lindsay, what do you say? She's at least 1.5 feet taller than Jason Gordon.
Yeah.
Well, at first I was like, is she wearing heels?
Nope.
Is he wearing heels? She's at least a head taller than him, though, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I mean,
they seemed into it. He seemed, she seemed into him.
I've only ever known one couple that worked for, like where the girl was taller than the guy, and maybe it's just Southern culture or whatever. But I've never known one that wasn't a deal breaker for. So
I've never had that problem. I'm not even 5'2", so I've always been shorter than everybody. I can't relate. Yeah. I can't.
But I did like this, though, because, and I feel bad for our actors here because they give her absolutely nothing to do this movie except stand around and fawn over all these boys. And I don't know. I just felt like, well, this is 1986. This is what we did. We weren't clearly worried about what she was trying to say. Because Sally Kellerman's really the woman that has any lines of note in the movie. Valerie's just there to be pretty.
Did you get the feeling that, he was obviously obsessed with her, but she was stalking him in the movie? Even though she was dating Chaz, she would find ways to connect eyes with him or run into him for something and ask him questions. It's like, what's going on here, And then the next scene, you'd see her dating Chaz, and you're like, what? Oh, okay, whatever. I don't know. I thought she kept stalking him.
Yeah, and then when he was like, I love you so much at the end, and she goes, that's the first time you've ever said 3 sentences to me. I love you too. She's been waiting for him to say that the whole time.
There was the spark, y'all. It was the 80s. You had the spark.
It was.
You had the guy you were supposed to date, but then you were in love with the loser. So this is how Elizabeth Shue ends up with Ralph Macchio, Karate Kid, by the way. Dude,
there you go.
No way.
Well, that doesn't last because in Karate Kid later he's dating the Japanese girl.
That was the most realistic thing about Karate Kid too, is the fact that Elizabeth Shue dumped him for a football player. He's like, that's not. We haven't talked about Lou yet. Burt Young, who everybody goes
what
from
a great
the Rocky
character.
Series. I love this dude.
I love that guy.
I love it. And I love the fact that he just doesn't give a shit. Dangerfield gets in trouble and they're like, what are you going to do about it, old man? Nothing, but he will. And he just takes on the whole football team.
That's a hell
that was so good. Oh, that was so good. I loved it.
I was reminded by this moment. I've heard Eric Dickerson talk about when he was in the NFL and he would come back to SMU for recruiting stuff, and some kid mouthed off to him once. He said, I pulled that kid over the side and said, look, I'm a grown man. I'll whoop the shit out of you, boy. And I'm like, this is what happens when a grown man that don't care no more gets a hold of you. It's over pretty quick. And I love Burt Young. He's so much fun in this movie. I love it. His best line is, look, I'm a tough guy, but I'm nice. I got 2 sons. I put one through college, one through a wall. Tough and nice.
He's just such a presence, even when he's not saying anything, he's just always there. I love how I feel like he's, I was going to say, I feel like he's one of the few people who Rodney Dangerfield's character, really just connects to and, feels fully comfortable with. I don't get the impression that he feels uncomfortable around anybody. He's always just himself, but that's the guy that really pulls like his human side out and not just his one-liner side.
Like in a different format, if this was a TV show and they strung it out for seasons or whatever, we would find out that Lou didn't have any friends in school growing up with Thornton, but he kept people from picking on Thornton. So they were lifelong buddies, and Lou was just a guy from the neighborhood that Thornton was like, I'm taking care of this guy because he can take care of me. And he does. He just, it's good to have friends in low places. Garth Brooks was not wrong. I mean, sometimes you got to have those. And
it was not.
Listen, I'm not a fighter either or whatever, but I had some friends in high school that were pretty tough that probably kept me from getting my ass kicked because people knew I was friends with those people and that they would have done something if anything happened to me. So I always appreciated that. It was nice to those people. But I love Burt Young. He's so much fun. I don't know if y'all caught it or not. My wife caught this one. At the very end of the dive meet when he's running up in the congratulations, did you notice the little teenage girl that he's like holding hands with and running along? It's one of the girls he picked up from the bar. I'm like,
that's amazing.
That's creepy and strange.
I have one thing to say about that last swim meet that I didn't notice, and we actually rewinded it and watched the team entrance 3 times because it was so funny, is Chaz. When he's walking out, he looks fully hammered drunk. Like, he's got like a scarf and he's just like sauntering out. And I was like, what? We rewinded it and watched it 3 times. It was so funny. Like, you could tell he was just goofing off backstage right before that. And, because he knew he probably wasn't in that shot for the rest of the day, They probably took them a day to film that. And then he was like, whatever. I'm just going to drink a 12-pack, saunter on out, and go sit by the pool for the rest of the day. No big deal. It was so funny. Highly recommend going back to watch that entrance.
Yeah, the dive meet scenes are so much fun in this because I loved reading the behind the scene thing that like this is supposed to be the worst diving team in the league, right? So they got all these collegiate divers and they said, okay, you have to suck. And they were like, what? And they made them do the most horrendous takes. They would do a dive and the director would be like, no, you have to screw it up because you're not any good. And the guy's like, but why would I do that? He couldn't convince these guys that you're not any good. So you need to be bad at this. So
I'm really glad you brought that up. I actually asked that when I was watching the movie. And I said, they must be really great divers to be able to mess that up. Because it's like Lucille Ball was a really great singer, but she also played a really bad one really well. And I feel like you have to play something really poorly, you generally have to be pretty good at it. So that's interesting.
Also,
just look at Marky Mark and Boogie Nights, right?
Yeah.
He can sing. We know he can sing, but he has to sing off key when he does the touch. Yep. The best ever. Love it.
Yep, that's a great example. The other thing, too, that I didn't know, and I've never known this until just this time watching this movie, but Amazon had one of those little bubbles when I paused it and said Rodney Dangerfield was actually a diver at the Jersey Pier in his younger days.
Wow.
And apparently the triple Lindy is something he saw someone do. And so that's how it got itself into the movie.
Actually,
you can't do that.
The guy that I watched this with is from Jersey. And he, when that part came up, goes, that's a true story, by the way. Like, that's a real group, a real diving group, a real circus group, whatever it was, at the pier. Like, that was a real thing and very popular. I had no idea.
That is so wild. Yeah, no, because it's so, I mean, obviously, some of the worst, like Rodney Dangerfield's smiling face on this other dude's body all of a sudden in the middle of that dive. But I love the whole bit, though, with M. Emmett Walsh. I think M. Emmett Walsh is just one of those character actors. You've seen him in a million movies. You don't know who he is. Him and Ned Beatty, the same. I kind of confuse them for each other sometimes. But they just show up and they do their thing and they just absorb into the role. And I love how, like, the diving coach is this hugely overweight guy. Like, this guy never dove in his life. There's no way. I know ex-divers. They still look like ex-divers. They don't lose that. He was a trip. And it was so much fun to watch that, though. But I wanted to ask y'all, like, what did you think of the whole conflict there? Because did you really think Jason really wanted to be a diver? Or was he just doing that because his dad wanted him to? I kind of got the sense that it was the latter, not the former.
It was unclear because he was pretty forthcoming with his dad.
Yeah, I think he wanted to be a diver and just wasn't good enough. until, Dad slipped some cash.
So you believe what Chaz says? You think Dad
Heck
paid
yeah.
off? You think so?
Did you see the dive he did to get on the team? It was the simplest dive ever. Like,
I don't
come on.
know my dives that well.
All he did was a front dive into the pool. He didn't flip or anything.
I thought he did a back dive. It was like a backwards.
Either way,
dive.
It wasn't no flips or anything. He just went in.
Well, we know it gets Brian's
I don't know
Brian
anything
cards.
about diving.
You gotta flip, right? So that's funny. Well, I hadn't thought about that. I often wondered. I'm like, did Thornton buy his way onto the team? Because he denies it later pretty vehemently. Like, no, that's the one thing I didn't do. But you're probably right, Brian. I mean, what didn't he pay off in this
Exactly.
movie? He had Kurt Vonnegut come write a paper about Kurt Vonnegut. So.
And the teacher didn't believe it was Kurt Vonnegut.
The best line is when Sally Kelmer goes, this person didn't know anything about Vonnegut. And then he cuts it out on the phone. I was like, that is awesome.
I'm canceling the check.
Yes.
So good.
But wouldn't that not be what a professor would do? Like the author can tell you, no, it's about this. Like, no, you're wrong. I've known professors that were bold enough to go, you don't even know your own work.
Oh, jeez. So, yeah, I'm not surprised. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a trip at all this goes. But I love all the hijinks that go on. And I love how it takes Thornton, a matter of about 2 weeks to become like the party meister of Wisconsin Central or wherever they're supposed to be in school here, right? And there's the cops are bringing the beer to the party, which, yeah, okay, that was fun. You get friggin' Danny Elfman and Oingo Boingo, who were retired at that point. Danny Elfman does the score of this movie, to come out and play one of their massive hits, Dead Man's Party. Love that song, love that band.
It's
but
so
at this point, they were kind of like done as a band. So that was a big deal to get them back.
That's funny. I like how it took no time for them to combine 3 dorm rooms into a castle. And he gives he slips them 200 bones for it. It's like,
hey, take your boys out for a party.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Like the first dorm room they walk in, I'm like, holy cow, what is that? I don't know about the dorm rooms you guys lived in, but they were not that big.
I lived in a former closet. Like, for real. Like, they converted a closet into a single dorm room. And my first year, I was paired up with a guy, and he left school the second quarter. And so I had my own room the rest of the year. So I got to pick to have a single room. Well, the only single room available was this old closet. And Holly will tell you, it was tiny closet. They put a sink in there and they called it a dorm room. And I lived in that for my first year. It was half the size of a regular dorm room, if you can imagine.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a sink in my dorm room. I thought that was pretty special.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
No AC, and I was on the 6th floor, in Virginia. So it was, like 150 degrees. We had fans blowing everywhere. It was, I don't remember like ever being super hot though. I just remember thinking, I bet I was really hot, but that was just not what I was concerned with at the time, I guess.
The Minnesota Vikings had their training camps at my alma mater every year up until last year, I think it was. And that's in August. And in August in Minnesota, it is awful. It's humid, gross. So they would be out on the practice field every day, twice a day, and they would have to sit in our dorm rooms. And they didn't have air conditioning in any of the dorm rooms, not even until very recently when they finally upgraded them. They had no air conditioning, and they had to deal with that. Just gross.
No wonder they sucked.
Damn.
Having to live with that.
Oh, no wonder Teddy Bridgewater tore himself up.
Jay with the shade.
Well, I mean, hey, it is what it is. But yeah, all kinds of hijinks ensue. You're right. They turned that huge dorm room into this like luxury penthouse up there for them to live in. And of course, Thornton is trying to live his whole business life while he's not doing schoolwork and all this. and everything is going south for him. I think the funny thing is when he gets the monkeys to start watching Georgia Championship Wrestling and feeding the pizza. That was awesome.
They're just taking a break. Yeah.
With the pizza and the sunglasses. I love it.
Right. But he's on the phone with like his whole team. Like, I need you to get down here and start taking notes in my class. I need you to call in an astrophysicist to do my homework for me. But I want to talk
secretary.
Yes. Oh, yes. Edie McClure.
Taking notes in the class with a typewriter.
I love, again, a staple of the 80s. A lot of people know from Ferris Bueller, the secretary. And I love how she's back there in her little steno. And Bombay just lays it into her. You will never pass this class, and that's such a smarmy, cool moment. She's like, oh, okay. And she's so funny.
I think my favorite movie she's seen that she's in is from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, when Steve Martin is going off on her at the checkout because they don't have a car for him. And she just looks at him and says, oh, dear. And he says, what? You're fucked. That's my favorite.
That is
just a great line.
She's a great comedic actress and just another great. But that's the thing about this movie. I think it's another reason that it lasts is it's just peppered with all these people you've seen in other stuff, and they maybe get one or two scenes, but they just blow you away. Like Sam Kinnison's in 2 scenes. He's in the scene where he goes off on the blonde and Thornton in that very underpopulated history class for a school that size, by the way. And my history class in a small school was bigger than that. And at the end, when Thornton is doing his, grueling oral exam, and he's like, come on, just let the man work. All right, he's under pressure. Say it! He starts screaming. And I was like, well, they gave him the best parts to do that. So, but yeah, I mean, he's definitely screwed. What do you think, though, about his relationship with Diane? Because I actually think it's kind of sweet and cute. You don't get to see people plus 40s get to have like an actual cute romance in a movie anymore.
I don't know, man. She's like, she plays the field. I think she's just having fun, and like he's like having fun, and then it just kind of happens. Like she doesn't take it seriously at first because she's still dating the other guy, right? And then you see her with another guy, I think even later in the movie, and so it's just like she's just having a good time. She's freelancing, whatever.
Yeah, the only moment where I was like, what the hell, was when he was in the hot tub at the party with all those other girls, and she walks in and sees
she got
him
pissed
and gets mad. And I was like, dude, you're dating someone. Like, what do you think's going to happen? And then later she's like, oh, yeah, it's fine. And I'm like, it was not fine last night. You were mad for no reason.
That's when she gives him the bad grade on the Vonnegut paper that Vonnegut wrote. Mm-hmm. you realize like she just hates her.
She's getting back at him for it.
Well, no, he has the best line though when he pops up with the snorkel outfit on and all the Zubaz bikinis. Let me introduce you to my nieces.
Oh, you're my nieces, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, first off, I'm like, as an uncle, I'm like, that would be weird and awkward. No. So, no, don't think so. That's very strange.
Not a good idea. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's during the Dead Man's Party, which is again, I can't go on enough about how much I love Oingo Boingo in that song because it's just so much fun, and it's the song that never ends too. You can play it for like an hour, and everybody's jamming to it. So, I once tried to convince one of my bands, Brian, to cover it, and they were like, "No, like they wouldn't do it. They're like, it's too old, man. We got to play like newer stuff." I was like, "But people will love this song. We're playing a frat house for goodness sakes." I would have been right, by the way.
Give the people what they want.
Right. Well, we ended up playing.
You can't do that all the time. You'll be playing Mustang Sally every damn time.
This is true, but we ended up. I did compromise, and we played The Cure's "Just Like Heaven," which did kill at every party we played it at. So there's that. I got my little art rock moment in. So he has to go before the academic board here, though, too. And I had a flashback, y'all, when Bombay's asking him the question. It's in 37 parts. I once was on a job interview with a guy that I highly respect, and I love him to death. But Jimmy asked questions like this. It's like, okay, Jay, I've got a question for you in 7 parts. And I'm literally sitting there like Thornton Mellon going like, holy God. And I felt like I was taking a test. Like did either of you ever have to do oral exams? Because I did for one class, and it was absolutely the worst experience of my life.
Nope. Thank God. I would have failed miserably.
Yeah, I did.
I had to
do monologues.
Well, that would have been just as tough because then you have to remember things. And I can't do that. I had to do that in one of my counseling classes.
Fair.
It was like, so tell us why you've diagnosed this person as this. Well, why didn't you do that? And you couldn't do anything but just sit there with the DSM and go, well, as you see that Margaret has da-da-da-da. And oh, God. Just PTSD from it right now. But I love how Thornton is playing through this. But it's such a, I mean, Diane gives him such a softball, right? When she pours him a glass of water, she turns a chair around. The only thing she doesn't do is pet his hair while she's asking him the questions about the poems, right? I mean, it's a little, I'm like, at some point, like the dean might go, this is a little inappropriate, Diane.
Dean Martin.
He didn't care. The dean wanted him to pass because he wanted his money.
Well, he already had it.
He probably told them all to throw softballs at him, and the only one who didn't was the business guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. Clearly. Well, because
didn't he roll his eyes when he's like, "I got a 7-part question," didn't the dean like? Oh.
Yeah. Well, I love though while Diane is trying to butter him up or whatever, and Bombay does give her crap for it, and she's like, "Sit down, you've had your turn." And I'm like, "Well, I guess she just broke up with him. That's where that ended. No more merger for you, Philip." I love his proposal to her. Diane, we should have a merger. And I'm like, This guy's never. Has this guy ever been on a date in his life? Holy God!
This guy's never actually been in a business either. I can tell that.
Has he ever touched a woman at all? Like I don't know. It's a very strange relationship those two had, but maybe he was a good cook. I don't know. We don't know. Diane did like her food, as we learned.
There might not have been a whole lot of options too. So
I don't know. Man. There's a lot of dudes on that campus. So I mean, her and Turgison got drunk one night at a faculty party, and there are stories other people talk about. Come on, that's who those people are. So, I've worked in academia, y'all. I'm telling you, stuff goes down.
I trust you, Jay. I trust you.
It's just weird. So, but not for people like me. I'm staff. I don't get to hang out in cool places like that. But anyway, I love the final exam. It's all about this big blowout dive, though, because the worst diving team in the country could rescue their season by beating, I don't know, whoever's there, that Iowa, whoever it is. And they're doing all these dives, and I love that. I don't understand Chaz's motivation here of I'll show them I won't dive, and it'll screw us from winning. I don't know how that exactly is going to get back at the Mellons in some way, but he's just decided that it would.
Oh, I just think he had his ego hurt from his first dive because his head wasn't in it.
Yeah.
I think his ego was hurt from the fact that Jason's with Valerie. Mm-hmm. And I think that was his motivation, was to not allow Jason to get on the team and win their first meet, because they hadn't won, right?
Yeah, they never won.
Without him on the team, they hadn't won. So now he's on it for the first time. He doesn't want him to win with him on it, because then it'll look like he came on and they won the meet.
Good point. We should also mention, too, some more Robert Downey Jr. comedic genius heckling divers with air horns and and things.
You know what's never been done? You never see anyone heckling divers. I like that Lou looks at him and he goes, "You're all right."
Yeah. They have this whole bonding moment. I'm like, Derek's going to become Jason's Lou later in life. The cycle will repeat it.
Yeah.
You can see
there
it happen.
Go.
Yep.
Because there's no way Derek's ever going to get a job with anybody except someone who knows him. I mean, that's not a guy that is going. If he came in my office, we'd be like, okay, we got to have some talks about your whole thing. But yeah, it's funny. Jason does well. You're right that Chaz does screw up his first dive, probably because he was drunk, Lindsay. You're right, but he screws up his first dive, and he's going for his last one, and he fakes the cramp. Minstrel or otherwise, as Jason says, and we have to get Thornton Mellon out there to do the triple Lindy, because you knew that was coming. They'd set that up. It's Chekhov's dive. We have to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most ridiculous dive ever. I mean, I guess if you're a circus act, I can see that being something you try to do, but for a real dive to jump off 3 different diving boards, you know how dangerous that.
Yeah, but also, the NCAA,
they better be dry as hell.
No.
Yeah.
There's no
and they were we added an extra springboard. It wasn't already there. They somehow found a springboard somewhere for him to bounce off of.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But you knew that was coming. And of course it's the big moment he has to do. And it's great. I mean, it's one of those kind of things that, again, it's cheesy, and in a movie that hadn't earned it, you'd call it out and be like, that's just bogus. But in this movie, it's like, of course, it's got to be him. It's got to be that dive that, saves the day. Because that's what happens. He gets out of the pool and he realizes he got all D's and one A, and then he makes out with the woman that gave him the A. So there's gonna be inquiries about this.
That's a good day. Though,
you know what?
Really?
I've never had a day that ended like that. So not in 43 damn years. So that's not how that goes. So it's not my life. I don't know about y'all's, but. No, I love the ending of it, though. It's a lot of fun. But then at the end, of course, they've asked him to speak at graduation because he's given enormous amounts of money and is clearly the most popular person on the campus now. Next to probably the mascot, which is always the most popular person on any large campus like that. And I love that he's in full academic regalia, like PhDs, the whole nine. He's got all of it, and he's just having a ball and doing his Rodney Dangerfieldness there at the end. It's a lot of. I love his advice, though. It's actually not bad advice now. Don't go out in the world. Move back home. Let your folks worry about it. I'm like, hey, there's a generation of people that took you up on that one. So,
yeah.
Yeah, there are.
That's funny. But we come to that moment, and we end on the big moment. And of course, we've got it because it's Rodney Dangerfield, and it's No Respect. We pay the licensing fees to Aretha, and we got to go out on RESPECT.
Alrighty then.
Yeah, that was a good end. I mean, the song, the whole ending was good, but the song was a nice touch.
Like I said, the soundtrack is pretty good. I mean, again, you got Oingo Boingo, you got Aretha Franklin, and look, I will light a fire and torch for Jude Cole anytime. Especially his movie songs. The movies aren't always good, but the songs are awesome. So, Start the Car, Back to School's a killing song.
This movie is chock full of just like 80s-tastic montage music.
I mean, it's got Michael Bolton in it, so it's got to be good, right?
Yes, from his metal days. Yes, at the leopard party where they're all in caveman outfits. Well, guys, I think we're at the part of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So what are yours for Back to School? Brian?
Well, I'm going to echo what my son said. Dad, I really like that movie we watched last night. So I think that's a win for a 12-year-old to really enjoy a movie from 1986 when that would have put me at, 8 years old at the time. So I thought that was a good win. I enjoyed it. I haven't seen it since I was a kid, so it's been a long time, but I got a kick out of it. I was chuckling the whole time. And so I'm going to give this a large popcorn. I think it was very enjoyable still to this day.
Lindsay?
I was going to give it a large popcorn too, Brian. I really enjoyed Rodney Dangerfield anyway before this. And again, this is probably the third or fourth time I've seen this movie. It gets better every time you watch it. There are so many little nuggets that you find throughout the movie every single time you watch it. So it just gets more. There are just little treats every time. And I love it. And I'm going to stick with that large popcorn.
Yeah, this is absolutely large popcorn. It's the best Dangerfield solo movie that there is. No offense, Easy Money and Ladybugs, but got nothing on this one. Totally holds up all these years later, too. That's the thing. And Lindsay, you've nailed it. You can rewatch this and you'll find something new to laugh at every time. It's fun, but it's definitely one you need to watch with other people, especially if somebody that really likes it or digs it. I think it's so neat, Brian. You introduced it to your son, likes it, and Lindsay, your boyfriend is already a fan of this, so this is great that it hit the sweet spot for both of you. This is large popcorn, totally. And an absolute blast to be a part of. And as always, it was a lot of fun talking about it with you two. Folks, you can find our entire archive section on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. That's where you'll find all the places you can download the podcast, Spotify, Google, Apple, you name it, we're there. Leave us a 5-star review and let us know what you think of the show. Please share the show on your social media. You can follow the show's socials on Twitter and Instagram at FilmstripPod and Filmstrip Podcast on Facebook. So until next time, for Brian and Lindsay, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to Filmstrip.
Thank you for listening to Filmstrip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Filmstrip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.